The wind that morning had a sound to it I still can't put a name to. Not howling, not gentle either. It moved through the canyon like something that had somewhere to be, brushing past the cottonwoods along the creek bed, rolling over the bluffs, carrying dust and the smell of rain that hadn't come yet. I'd lived in Dakota Territory my whole life, born on the land my grandfather had walked before me, raised in the shadow of the Black Hills, and I knew every voice that wind made. Everyone. But that morning it sounded different. My horse Chongtechila, the one I called Heart, because she knew mine better than I did, she stopped before I asked her to. Right there on the rim of Broken Tooth Ridge, she just stopped, ears forward, neck long, every muscle listening. I gave her a moment. I'd learned a long time ago to trust what she felt before I trusted what I saw, and then I heard it. It's small, thin, almost swallowed by the wind, a baby crying. I need to tell you something before I go further, because if I don't, what comes next won't make sense. My name is Chayton Eagleheart. I was 34 years old that autumn of 1873, chief of the Black Wolf Band, the smallest of the Lakota groups, still living in the unceded territory, about 60 people counting the children. We weren't at war. We weren't at peace either. We were something in between, something that had no clean word. We were surviving, carefully, one day at a time, watching the world change around us the way a man watches a flood from a ledge, not sure yet if the ledge will hold. I had no wife, not anymore. My wife, Wingyung Wangchiunka, Little Swallow, had died 3 winters before, taking our son with her. He never drew a breath outside her body. I'd buried them together on a hillside facing east, and I hadn't spoken their names out loud since. The grief wasn't something I talked about. It lived in my chest like a stone that had become part of the wall, permanent now, something I'd just built around. I say this so you understand. I was not a soft man. I was not a man who was easily moved. I had seen things that would pull the softness out of anyone and leave them something harder, something quieter. I led people. I kept order. I made decisions. I did not cry. I had not cried since the hillside 3 years ago, and even then I'd done it alone. I want you to know that, because what happened next, what happened on that ridge, it cracked something in me that I didn't even know was still fragile. Chongtechila stepped to the edge herself, slow and deliberate, like she already knew she had to be careful. I looked down. The cliff dropped maybe 40 feet into a dry creek bed. Boulders at the bottom, river smoothed, pale in the morning light. Juniper growing out of the rock face sideways, roots clinging where there seemed to be nothing to cling to. And on a ledge, not at the bottom, maybe 15 feet down, one of those random shelves the rock sometimes throws out, a woman. She was white. Young, I thought, though I couldn't tell exactly from above. Dark hair that had come loose from whatever she'd pinned it in. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. She was curled around something, her whole body making a shape I recognized without thinking. The shape of a person covering what they love. She was covering a baby, and she wasn't moving. I didn't think. I was already off the horse, already finding the ledge path that ran along the cliff face, the one only someone who'd grown up on this land would know. It was barely a path. More of a suggestion. A series of flat places where a careful person could put their feet if they didn't look down and didn't hesitate. I didn't look down. I didn't hesitate. She heard me coming, heard the rock shift under my boot, and her head snapped up. The fear on her face when she saw me was the kind that comes from a place beyond reason, pure animal fear. Her eyes went wide and she pressed back against the rock wall, pulling the baby tighter, and I could see, even from where I was, still 4 feet above and to the left, that her hands were shaking. I stopped. I put one hand out flat, low, the gesture you make to a spooked animal. I see you. I'm not coming closer. She was staring at me like I was the thing that had put her on the ledge. I said in English, I won't hurt you. She didn't answer. The baby was crying still, that thin, broken sound I'd heard from the rim. But even that was getting quieter, getting tired. I'm going to help you up, I said. That's all. Her jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping under her skin. Her lip was split. There was dried blood on her temple, tracking down the side of her face. Brown now, hours old at least. Someone had put her here, that's what I knew. Someone hadn't just let her fall. Someone had put her here. The blood was old. She hadn't fallen last night in the dark. She'd been up there in daylight and gone over in daylight. And she'd been on this ledge since then, all night, holding that baby in the cold. I didn't say any of that. I just waited. After a long moment, her eyes moving over my face like she was reading something written there, looking for the lie, she gave the smallest nod I've ever seen. Just a fraction, just enough. Getting her up was harder than getting myself down. She couldn't use her left arm properly. It was bent wrong. And And when I reached for it, she made a sound that she tried to swallow but couldn't. I shifted, got my arm under hers instead, took the weight on my side. She held the baby against her chest with her right arm and didn't loosen her grip on it once. Not once. Even when the rock crumbled slightly under her foot and she lurched and I caught her full weight, she didn't loosen her grip on that child. When we got to the top, she sat down hard in the dirt. Her legs just gave. She sat there in the dust at the edge of Broken Tooth Ridge, bent over the baby, and she was shaking so hard her teeth were clicking. I took my outer blanket. I always carried one tied behind the saddle, and I put it around her shoulders. She flinched when I touched her, then went still, then slowly pulled it tighter. I sat back on my heels a few feet away and looked at the baby. A girl. Couldn't have been more than 4 months old. Face red from crying, damp around the edges. She'd stopped crying now and was making small, hitching sounds, staring up at the sky with the unfocused look newborns have. Like they're still deciding if the world is worth the trouble. She was alive. They were both alive. "What's your name?" I asked. The woman looked up at me. Her eyes were gray-green, the color of sage after rain. "Clara," she said. Her voice came out scraped and dry. "Clara Voss, Chayton," I said. And then, 'cause sometimes it helps to give people something simple to hold on to. "You're safe now." She looked at me for a long moment. And then, I don't think she meant to. I think it just happened. Her face crumpled. Not dramatic, not the way crying looks in stories. It was the quiet kind, the kind that comes after you've been holding yourself together so hard and for so long that the moment someone tells you it's over, your body just doesn't know what to do with the release. Tears came down her face and she pressed her cheek against the baby's head, and she cried without making much sound at all. I looked away, not because I was uncomfortable, well, maybe a little, but because that kind of crying is private. It belongs to the person. You don't watch it. I watched the horizon instead. Her story came out in pieces over the next hour, the way stories always do when the person telling them is still half inside what happened. She'd come out from Ohio 18 months ago with her husband, Thomas Voss Homesteaders. They'd built a cabin 2 days' ride east, near a place the settlers called Pryor Creek. Thomas had been a good man, she said. Steady, careful. He'd planted winter wheat and mended things and never raised his voice. But Thomas had been dead for 3 months, fever. Fast. The kind that takes a man between sunset and sunrise and leaves you standing in the morning, holding nothing but the shape of what he used to be. She'd stayed. She didn't have the money to go back east, didn't have family that could take her, and she'd been 8 months pregnant when Thomas died. So there wasn't much choice. She'd stayed and had the baby. A woman from a neighboring homestead had come and helped, and she'd been managing. Barely. But managing. His name was Edmund Greer. She said it flat. No emotion around it. The way you say the name of something dangerous. He'd been after the land from the beginning. Her land, Thomas's land, 160 acres under the Homestead Act, sat between Greer's existing claim and the creek, and he wanted the water access. He'd offered to buy. She'd said no. He'd sent 2 of his men to persuade her. She'd met them at the door with Thomas's rifle and they'd left. 3 days ago he'd come himself. She stopped there, looked down at the baby. The baby, her name was Ruth. She told me Ruth Marie, had fallen into the shallow jerky sleep of an exhausted infant, face slack, one tiny fist against her cheek. He came himself, I said, to let her know she didn't have to say the rest if she didn't want to. She shook her head slightly. She wanted to say it. I think she needed to. He had 4 men with him. They took Ruth from my arms. One of them held her while Greer. She stopped, started again. He said he'd drop her in the well if I didn't sign the paper he'd brought. Sign the deed transfer. Her jaw was doing that clenching thing again. I signed it, and then he gave Ruth back, and told his men to take us both for a ride. Said he was feeling generous. Said he'd leave us somewhere we could. She almost laughed. It was the ugliest sound I think I've ever heard. Somewhere we could think about our situation. They'd brought her here on horseback at night. She hadn't known the ridge in the dark. She'd heard one of the men say something to the other. Something she couldn't catch, and then her voice dropped to almost nothing. One of them shoved me. From behind, I didn't even see it coming. I just went over. She'd landed on the ledge by chance. Pure, random, undeserved chance. Her shoulder had hit the rock face on the way down, and the force of it had spun her so she'd landed on her side instead of her head. She'd protected Ruth with her body the whole way. The arm was broken. I was sure of it by then. She'd spent the night on that ledge in the dark, talking to Ruth, keeping her warm, convinced no one was coming. And then morning had come, and I had. When she finished, the wind had shifted. Coming from the north, now colder. The cottonwoods down in the creek bed were turning, a few leaves yellow at the edges, the season starting to turn its collar up. "We'll take you back to my camp," I said. She went very still. I understood the stillness. I didn't take offense at it. "You need your arm set, you need food and water. Ruth needs." I looked at the baby. "She needs what babies need." I stood. "My camp is 2 hours' ride. You'll be safe there. No one will touch you." She looked at me for a long time, that reading thing again. Those sage green eyes moving over my face. Slow and methodical, like she was checking every word I'd said against something she kept inside herself. Some scale she'd built over the years, for measuring whether a person meant what they said. "All right," she said finally. "Just that. All right. 2 hours ride," and she didn't say much. She rode behind me on Chongtechila, Ruth tucked between us, warm against her chest. I felt her sitting rigid at first. That careful distance people keep when they don't yet trust the person they're pressed against. Gradually, maybe an hour in, when the rocking of the horse had been steady long enough, she leaned slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough that she wasn't holding herself upright on pure will anymore. Her head almost touched my shoulder. Didn't quite, but almost. I didn't say anything about it. My camp was in a valley. Most people couldn't find without knowing where to look. The entrance was a narrow cut through the rock, barely wide enough for a horse and rider, and it opened into a broad grass-floored space, with a creek running through it and old cottonwoods throwing shade across the whole west side. We'd been here a month. We'd likely stay through winter if the weather held and if that constant, if 1873 Dakota Territory, if we were left alone. We were not always left alone. When I rode in with her, the camp went quiet the way camps do when something unexpected happens. Not the fearful quiet, not the kind before trouble, the curious kind. Children stopped their games. Women looked up from what they were doing. Old Standing Bear, who was 72 and had seen more change than anyone should have to see, was sitting outside his lodge and watched us come in without changing his expression at all, which was how I knew he was very interested. I took Clara and Ruth to my own lodge. It was the largest, not because I was vain, but because the chief's lodge is used for meeting, for decisions, for the work of the community. It had room. Pushte Wingyong, limping woman, which was not an unkind name among us, simply a true one, was the person I trusted with medicine. She was in her 50s, stocky, with hands that knew what they were doing without being told. I spoke to her outside the lodge for a moment, explained the arm, explained the baby. She nodded and went inside without ceremony. I waited outside. I heard after a while a sound from side. Short and sharp, the arm being set, and then, nothing. Clara made no other sound. After another few minutes, limping woman came out. "The arm will heal," she said. "She's strong. The baby? Hungry." She paused. "There's a young mother in camp whose baby is 6 months. She'll help." Another pause. "She asked me who you are," I told her. "She asked if she could stay a few days. I said that was your decision." "She can stay," I said, "as long as she needs." Limping woman looked at me for a moment in that particular way she had, the one that said she was noting something down somewhere in her very long memory. "Good," she said, and went back inside. The first 3 days I didn't see much of her. I had my own work. There were decisions to make. About food stores. About a dispute between 2 families over a horse. About the presence of soldiers that had been reported moving through the territory 40 miles north. The work of a chief is mostly invisible work. Mostly the work of keeping things together. Keeping people safe. Making the 100 small decisions that add up to a community being able to breathe. But I knew Clara was there. I was aware of her the way you're aware of something that has changed in the landscape. A new rock, a fallen tree. You don't stare at it. You just know it's there. On the 4th morning I came back from the creek at first light. I went every morning, alone, to sit with the water and think. And she was sitting outside my lodge with Ruth in her lap. The baby was awake, doing that wide-eyed newborn staring. Clara was looking east at the line where the bluffs met the sky. Her arm was in a splint bound close to her body. She looked like she'd slept. She looked like something had come out of her face that had been clenching it from the inside. She heard me coming and looked up. "Morning," she said. "Morning." I sat down a few feet away, the way I always did, giving space. She'd begun to notice the pattern, I think. The way I always stopped a bit short, let there be air between us. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Why did you stop?" "On the ridge." She looked at me. Most people would have. I mean, you didn't know me. You didn't know anything about me. You could have ridden past. I thought about how to answer that. Not because I didn't have one, but because this true answer was layered, and some of it I didn't fully understand myself yet. "Chongtechila stopped," I said. "My horse." She almost smiled. You stopped because your horse did? I stopped because she heard something I didn't, and she was right. I looked at Ruth. I'm glad she was right. Clara was quiet for a moment. What does it mean? Her name? It means heart. She looked at the horse who was staked nearby and eating with complete serenity. She's beautiful. She is. We sat there for a while, just the two of us and the baby, and the morning light coming up slow. The camp was waking around us. Fires being built, the smell of food, someone's child laughing somewhere on the other side of the cottonwoods. Normal sounds. Good sounds. What are you going to do? I asked her eventually. She'd been thinking about it. I could tell by the way she answered. Not like she was figuring it out, but like she was reading from a list she'd already made. I can't go back to the cabin. He has the deed now. She paused. I don't have proof of what he did. It's just my word. Another pause. I don't have anywhere to go. She wasn't saying it for pity. She was just laying it out, the way a person does trying to see the shape of a problem clearly. You can stay here, I said, until you figure out where you want to go. She turned and looked at me. You've already said that twice now. Something moved across her face that I couldn't entirely read. You mean it. I don't say things I don't mean. She held my gaze for a moment, and I held hers, and something happened in that moment that I don't know how to describe, except to say it felt like two things that had been at distance slowly beginning to admit they were in the same room. Then Ruth made a demanding sound, and Clara looked down, and the moment passed, but it didn't disappear. She learned our ways quietly. That was what I noticed first. She didn't come in with opinions about how things should be done. She watched, she listened. When she didn't understand something, she asked, always the women, always politely, always genuinely curious, rather than politely horrified the way some white people got. Limping Woman took a liking to her fast. Old Standing Bear, who liked almost no one, conceded that she seemed sensible. Her arm healed slowly. 6 weeks, Limping Woman had said, for the bone to knit properly. In the meantime, Clara learned to do things one-handed, to carry Ruth with one arm, to help at the fire using her body as a counterweight, to braid with her fingers and her chin. She was stubborn in the most specific way. Not about important things, she bent easily on things that didn't matter. But the things that mattered to her, she didn't budge on. Not an inch. I watched her one afternoon have a quiet, completely firm argument with Limping Woman about whether Clara should be resting or not. Limping Woman thought she should rest. Clara thought she was perfectly fine and should be helping. They went back and forth for a few minutes in this polite, immovable way, and Limping Woman finally laughed, which I almost never heard Limping Woman do, and let her help. Ruth grew. That was the other thing I watched. She got heavier and more opinionated by the day. She started recognizing faces. She started holding things. Fingers, mostly anyone's fingers she could get to. She had Thomas Voss's nose, Clara said once, looking at her daughter. She'd said it quiet and I'd let it sit quiet. One evening, 5 weeks into their stay, the nights cold enough for frost now, I was sitting at the fire late. After the rest of the camp had gone in, I had papers in front of me. We'd gotten word about a new treaty proposal moving through the government, and one of the men who traded with us regularly had brought me a copy, and I was trying to understand what it said and what it didn't say. Reading English was something I'd learned at 15 from a missionary who had been genuinely kind, which was rarer than it should have been. I heard her footsteps. I knew them by then, the particular rhythm, the slight drag of the left foot when she was tired, and didn't look up. She sat across the fire. Can't sleep, I asked. Ruth's asleep, she said, which was an answer of a different kind. She looked at the papers. What are those? I told her about the treaty proposal. She listened. Then she held out her good hand. Can I? I gave her the papers. She read for several minutes. Her face while she read was very still, very focused. She read the way someone reads when they're looking for the hidden thing, not just the stated thing. This clause, she said, pointing. This one about land held for the benefit of. That language. She stopped, started again. In Ohio, land disputes. My father was a surveyor. I grew up with land language. That phrase almost never means what it says. It usually means whoever administers the trust has authority to sell without consent of the. She stopped again, looked up. I'm sorry, I don't know if that's helpful. I'm probably reading it wrong. I looked at the clause she was pointing to. I'd read it 3 times and something had nagged at me, something I couldn't pin down. You're not reading it wrong, I said. She looked up. That's exactly what it means, I said. We looked at each other across the fire. I'm sorry, she said. She meant it, not in the performative way. In the way of someone who has just understood the actual weight of something and is sitting with it. It's not your fault, I said. No, but it's people I come from. She was quiet for a moment. It's not nothing to say I'm sorry. No, I agreed. It's not nothing. We sat with the fire for a while. Tell me about this place, she said finally. This valley, how old is it? And I told her. Not the political history, not who claimed it, and who wanted it, and what paper it was written on. The real history, the kind that lives in the land itself. I told her about my grandfather, who had named the eastern bluff for the shape it made at sunrise. I told her about the creek, how in deep winter it kept a stretch of open water that brought deer in before dawn, and how my father had taught me to hunt there when I was 8 years old. I told her about a summer when I was 12, and a flood had come through the valley and rearranged the stones in the creek bed, and how my mother had said the land was reminding us that it was always changing, always becoming. She listened the whole time, didn't interrupt. When I stopped, she didn't rush to fill the silence. Your mother sounds wise, she said. She was. She died when I was 19. I'm sorry. She died in winter, which she would have liked. She always said the cold was honest. Clara laughed softly at that. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh. It came up unexpectedly genuine, and she looked slightly surprised at herself for having done it. It was the best sound I'd heard in a long time. I thought about Little Swallow. I thought about her the way I always thought about her. Not with a wound of it, but with the settled ache of something fully grieved. Something that had become part of the land of me. I didn't feel guilty for laughing, or for sitting by this fire, or for the fact that my heart was doing something it hadn't done in years. I felt something like gratitude, actually. Strange thing. But that's what it was. The day Edmund Greer came, I was on the East Ridge. I saw the dust before I saw the riders, 4 of them, coming from the direction of Pryor Creek, following the trail that ran along the canyon, which meant someone who knew this country had guided them, or they'd been watching long enough to learn it. That thought, that someone had been watching, sat cold in my stomach. I rode back to camp at speed. Clara was with the children, sitting in a circle, teaching them. I still smile thinking about this. How to play a hand-clapping game she'd learned as a child in Ohio. Ruth was on a blanket nearby, absolutely rapt at the spectacle. I came in fast enough that everyone in the camp went alert. That's how it works. When the chief rides in fast, nobody asks questions, they just go ready. Clara. She was already standing, already reading my face. Riders coming, 4 of them. From the east, she went white under her sun-dark skin. Greer, she said. I don't know yet, go inside. I looked at her. Trust me, something happened in her eyes. A decision, fast and clean. I trust you, she said. She picked up Ruth and went. I was standing in the middle of camp when they rode in, just standing, nothing in my hands. My people were around me. Not gathering in an obvious way, not making a show of it, but there. Old Standing Bear had come out of his lodge and was sitting in front of it. Several of the men were visible, going about business unhurried but present. Edmund Greer was what I'd expected. Heavy through the chest, well-dressed for a man riding through territory. The kind of face that had never learned to be careful because it had never needed to be. He looked around the camp like he was calculating inventory. His eyes landed on me. I'm looking for a white woman, he said. No greeting. Goes by Clarup Voss. She might have a baby with her. This is a Lakota camp, I said. There's no white woman here. He looked at me for a moment, then let his eyes slide around the camp in that slow, proprietorial way. Looking for her. Now I don't mean any trouble, he said, in the voice of a man who has never in his life had to mean anything he said. She's a family matter. I'm just trying to help her get home safe. You pushed her off a cliff, I said. The silence that followed was very particular. His face did something complex, rearranged itself. The easy confidence slipped just slightly, like a mask that had moved off-center. I don't know what she told you, but she told me what happened. I took one step toward him, just one. She told me about the deed. She told me about the rifle. She told me about the ledge. Greer looked at me for a long moment, calculating. I could sense working through the options, through the math of 4 riders versus 60 people who knew this land and had been living carefully and had nothing left to lose from a man like him. You don't want trouble, he said. You're the one who rode into my camp, I said. Whatever trouble you had, you brought it with you. He held my eyes for another moment. Then he turned his horse. This isn't finished, he said to the ground, not to me. It is, I said. You should go now. He went, his 4 men went with him. I watched the dust from the eastern trail until it had fully settled. Then I turned and walked to my lodge. She was inside, sitting on the ground with Ruth, who had, with complete indifference to the drama, fallen asleep. Clara looked up when I came in. Is he gone? He's gone. She let out a breath. Then she looked at me, and whatever she saw in my face, I don't know what I was showing exactly, Made her look down quickly like she was giving me privacy. I sat down across from her. He'll come back, she said. Not a question. Maybe. But not here. I thought about it. He'll try something legal, or he'll try to make trouble with the military. He won't come back here himself. I looked at her. Men like that have a plan they're comfortable with. Taking a woman's deed is the plan he knows. Coming into a Lakota camp is outside it. She stood slowly. Then, what do I do about the deed? You said there was no record of the transfer. He brought the paper with him. There was no, the original homestead filing is at the land office in Yankton. And the transfer he made you sign, he has it. I thought for a moment. I know a man. A lawyer in Yankton. A white lawyer, which is what matters in a white court, who has worked on land cases before. I can write to him. It will take time. And it may not work. But it might. It might. She was quiet for a moment, and then she did something I hadn't expected. She reached across the space between us and put her hand over mine. Just for a second. Her palm warm on the back of my hand, her fingers just resting there. Thank you, she said. For all of it, for the ridge, for the camp, for today. She shook her head slightly. I don't know how to. You don't need to, I said. She lifted her hand. The warmth stayed. The letter I wrote to the lawyer took 3 days to compose to my satisfaction. I wrote it in English, in the careful, formal register that official letters demanded. Clara sat with me for 2 of those evenings, helping me find the language that would carry the most weight, the most clarity. She knew legal language. She'd grown up with it. The daughter of a surveyor. Watching her father parse property lines and boundary descriptions her whole childhood. Watching her think was something I could have done for a long time. She leaned over the paper, her good arm on the table, her broken arm held close, and she'd read a sentence, and then look up with something, moving behind her eyes and say, "What about this instead?" And she was usually right. The precision of her mind was something I hadn't expected, and then couldn't stop noticing. She was warm. God, she was warm. With the children, with Limping Woman, with everyone in the camp, but that warmth didn't mean soft. The mind underneath it was sharp as a skinning knife and twice as careful. On the 3rd evening we finished the letter. She read it through one last time. "That's good," she said. "That's really good." She looked at me. "You write well." "I read a great deal," I said. "What do you read?" I told her. It was an odd list for a man in my position, and she knew it. Legal documents, philosophy, natural science, whatever the trader brought, whatever I could get my hands on. Books were rare and precious on the frontier, and I treated them accordingly, which is to say I read everything. Her face while I talked was soft, open, the way faces go when someone is genuinely pleased by what they're hearing. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" She considered. "I don't know exactly. I had things in my head, pictures. Things people had said, things I'd read." She shook her head slightly. "Most of it was wrong." "Most of it usually is," I said. She smiled. It was a full smile this time, not the cautious half measure, and it did something to the air in the room, or maybe it did something to me. Both, probably. "Chayton," she said. My name in her voice had a particular quality. She said it correctly. She'd asked me early on, carefully, how to say it, and she'd practiced until she had it. Not many people bothered. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Yes. Do you want?" She stopped, looked at Ruth, who was in the corner making small sounds, studying her own fingers with intense concentration. "Do you think about having a family again, children?" The question landed quietly. I'd told her about Little Swallow. Not all of it, but the shape of it. I'd told her one night by the fire, and she'd listened the way she always listened. Completely, without rushing me, without offering the reflexive comfort that usually made grief harder to speak. "I think about it," I said. "Yes." She held my gaze. "Me too," she said softly. "I didn't think I would after Thomas. I thought that part of my life was probably done." She looked back at Ruth, and then I look at her, and I think, she needs more than I can give her alone. She paused. She needs what I can't be. The fire was low. Outside the camp was quiet, deep in the night. Somewhere a bird, one of the night birds that stayed through autumn, made its sound and went still. "You're more than you think you are," I said. She looked at me. Something between us had been building for weeks. I'd been aware of it the way you're aware of weather changing. The slow shift in pressure, the new quality of the air. And it was here now, fully here, not building anymore, but present and waiting. I reached across and took her hand, slowly, giving her every chance to move it, to pull back, to say a thing and let the moment pass. She didn't pull back. Her fingers curled around mine, warm. "Certain. I don't know what this is," she said quietly. "What we are." "We don't have to name it yet," I said. She nodded slowly, looked at our hands. "Ruth grabbed your finger this morning," she said. Quiet, almost to herself, I remembered. I'd been passing by, and Ruth had been on the blanket, and her hand had shot out. That random, determined newborn grab, and caught my index finger and held on with a strength that was ridiculous for someone so small. I'd stood there for a full minute, not wanting to pull away. She did, I said. She doesn't do that with everyone, Clara said. She does it with people she's decided about. I looked at Ruth, who had fallen asleep now, one fist still raised. Something in my chest, that stone I told you about, the one that had become part of the wall, shifted. Not broke, didn't shatter dramatically, just shifted. Like it had been sitting in one position for 3 years and had finally, slowly, found a different one. The letter reached the lawyer. The lawyer was a man named Aldous Pry, who had a reputation for taking cases that made powerful men uncomfortable, which made him exactly the right person. He wrote back in 6 weeks. I'm compressing the legal part, because the law is the law, and it's slow and tedious, and the details of it would take longer than the story deserves. What I'll tell you is the essence of it. Greer had made a mistake. Not a catastrophic one, but a real one. In his haste, in his certainty that a widow with a baby and no connections couldn't fight back, he'd had Clara sign the deed transfer, but hadn't had it witnessed by a proper territorial official as the law required. His own arrogance had made it invalid. Combined with the testimony of the neighboring homesteader woman who had helped with Ruth's birth, a woman named Hannah Cord, who had seen Greer's men ride past her property the night Clara disappeared, which she'd noted because they'd frightened her. And Pry was able to build something. It took 4 months. It took 2 trips by Pry to the Territorial Land Office. It took a deposition from Clara written in my lodge by firelight, me beside her, Ruth asleep in the cradle that Standing Bear, who had more softness in him than he'd ever admit, had made from cedar wood without being asked. But at the end of it, the land was hers again. When the letter arrived confirming it, Clara was standing outside in the autumn light doing something with herbs she'd been learning from Limping Woman. I came and gave her the letter without saying anything. She read it, read it again. Then she put her hand over her mouth and her eyes filled, and she stood there for a moment, very still, looking at the paper. It's mine, she said. It's yours, I said. She lowered the paper and looked at me. The tears were still there. She didn't wipe them. I should go back, she said. I know. There's a cabin to put right. Winter stores too, the whole thing needs. I know. She was looking at me with something on her face I hadn't quite seen before. Not sad exactly. Not happy either. Something more complicated and more honest than either of those. Come with me, she said. I didn't answer right away. Chayton, she took a step toward me. I'm not asking you to leave your people. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are. She stopped, started over. I spent 5 months being held by this place. By you. And I don't want to. I don't want to go back to that cabin alone and have the thing that grew here be only a memory. I looked at the valley around us, the bluffs, the cottonwoods, the creek. 60 people who were my responsibility, my family, my purpose. The grave on the hillside facing east. The life I'd built around the stone in my chest. The stone that had shifted. My camp doesn't leave with me, I said. I leave, they stay. They know how to stay. I paused. I've been gone before, long trips, weeks at a time. I looked at her. Pryor Creek is 2 days' ride. She understood what I was saying. She was smart enough to not make it more dramatic than it was. This was the West. Distance was just distance. People rode. 2 days is nothing, she said. 2 days is nothing, I agreed. She smiled. And then she stepped forward, fully forward, and put her arms around me. Her good arm around my back, her healing arm, careful but present, and pressed her face against my chest, and I put my hands on her back, and we stood there in the autumn light while Ruth slept inside, and the valley breathed around us. She was small against me. I'd noticed before how she carried herself like she was bigger than she was. That particular posture of someone who had made themselves take up space when they needed to. But right now she wasn't doing that. Right now she was just herself, just her actual size, and she fit against me the way things fit when they were always supposed to. I felt her exhale. Long and slow and complete. The way a person breathes when they've come inside from the cold. When the door is shut and the fire is lit, and they're finally somewhere they don't have to be on guard. I held her. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. Somewhere Ruth stirred and went quiet. Old Standing Bear walked past on his way to the creek and deliberately looked at nothing. I held her and thought about what it meant to have a home. I'd always thought of home as a place, this valley, this land. But it was becoming clear to me, slowly, the way real things become clear, not in a flash but in a deepening, that home could also be a direction. That it could be something you found not by staying still, but by following what mattered. And what mattered was in my arms. I helped her get the cabin in order. The first time I brought 2 men from my camp, Hawk Feather and his son, who were both good with wood and didn't mind the 2-day ride. We fixed the roof where it had let water in. We built the winter stores up. We cut wood. Hannah Cord came over from her homestead the second day, took one look at the situation, and immediately became Clara's staunchest ally in the entire territory. She was a large, forthright woman of about 50 who said what she thought and didn't apologize for it, and she and Clara were fast friends within an hour. I rode back to my camp. I came back in 3 weeks. Greer had left the territory by then. We heard it from the trader, who heard it from someone in Yankton. Apparently the legal defeat had been embarrassing enough. And apparently Aldous Pry had let certain parties know about the specifics of how Clara had ended up on that ledge. And apparently, even in 1873, there were some things that could make a man's position untenable. He was gone. I didn't waste energy being glad about it. I just noted it and moved on. The second winter I was at Pryor Creek, more than I was at the valley. My people knew where to find me. The 2-day ride became routine, became the kind of route you know so swell your horse starts the turns before you ask. Changtachila loved the cabin pasture. She had opinions about it. She made them clear. Ruth took her first steps in the cabin doorway, late February, on a day when the sun had come out strong enough to start the icicles dripping. She let go of the doorframe and took 3 steps onto the porch boards and stood there with the look of someone who has just discovered a fact about themselves that changes everything. Clara made a sound. I can't describe it. The sound a mother makes when something like that happens. I was standing on the porch steps, and Ruth, she looked at me, those brown eyes, Thomas's nose, Clara's absolute nutness already written in her jawline. She looked at me and took 3 more steps and grabbed my knee. Held on. I sat down on the step and she climbed into my lap with the complete authority of a child who has decided something. Clara had her hand over her mouth again, eyes bright. She decided, Clara said softly. That's all. She decided, I said. Ruth patted my knee twice with her palm, like she was confirming something, and then leaned back against my chest and pointed at the dripping icicle with complete confidence that I would find it as interesting as she did. I did. Spring, second spring. The morning Clara told me she wanted to be married, I was at the creek, same as always. First light, the water moving, the sound that I'd been coming to hear my whole life. She came down the path in her coat, her boots, her dark hair loose. She sat beside me on the rock. I want you to marry me, she said, straight out. No preamble. That was Clara. I looked at the water. I've been thinking about asking you the same thing for 6 months, I said. She turned to look at me. I turned to look at her. We're ridiculous, she said. Very, I agreed. She laughed. I laughed. It moved through the both of us at the same time, that laughter easy and full and completely unguarded. Then it quieted. I want Ruth to have your name, she said. If you'd want that, she doesn't have to. But I want you to know that I'd want it. I looked at the water again. Thought about names. Thought about the name of my father and my grandfather, and the hillside facing east, and the 3 years of silence, and the morning on Broken Tooth Ridge when Changtachila stopped. I thought about a 4-month-old girl holding on in the dark on a ledge 40 feet above a dry creek bed. I thought about what it means to catch someone. Ruth Eagleheart, I said. Clara was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. Her voice was soft and sure. Yes, that's exactly right. I reached over and took her hand. The same way I'd done that first time by the fire, slow, deliberate, making space for her to say no. She laced her fingers through mine, tight, certain. The creek ran past us, cold and clear, carrying the snowmelt down from the hills. The sun was just touching the tops of the bluffs. Somewhere behind us at the cabin, Ruth would be waking up soon, would be pulling herself to standing at the side of her cot, would be making the demanding sounds that meant the world should come to her immediately. I sat by the water with this woman's hand in mine, and felt the morning open up around us, big and quiet and full of everything that was going to happen next. And I thought about my mother. The cold is honest, so is the morning, so is the water. So is the hand of someone who has chosen you, and been chosen back, and knows the difference between what you were before the choosing and what you are after. I had been a man with a stone in his chest and a grave on a hillside. I was still that man. I would always be that man. The grief didn't leave. It had become part of the land of me, permanent and real and mine. But I was also now a man sitting by a creek in the early light with a woman who had survived a cliff, and a night alone, and a winter, and a lawyer, and all the ordinary, extraordinary terror of being alive. And she was holding my hand and calling me by name, and in the cabin behind us, a little girl with her father's nose was about to wake up and want the world. I realized, sitting there in the cold, honest morning, exactly where I was supposed to be. Not despite everything, because of everything. We married in June. Both ways. Clara's way first, which was a small ceremony in the valley, with a circuit preacher who came through once a month, and was a decent enough man, who asked no questions that weren't his to ask. Hannah Cord came. Aldous Pry made the trip from Yankton and said it was the best 2 days he'd spent in years. Old Standing Bear sat in the front and wore his finest and looked at no one and everything. Then our way. Limping Woman led it. I won't tell you all of it. Some things belong to the people who live them. But I'll tell you that it was morning, and the valley was full of light. And Ruth sat in Standing Bear's lap through the whole thing, and didn't make a sound, as though she understood, at 14 months old, that this was important, as though she was presiding. Clara stood across from me and said the words she was meant to say, and I said mine, and there was a moment, right in the middle of it, when she looked at me, and I looked at her, and everything that had happened was present in the look. The ridge, the ledge, the fire, the letters, the laughter by the creek, all of it in one look, the whole story compressed into a single held gaze. And then Limping Woman said something, and we both looked at her, and the ceremony continued. Afterward, Ruth held out both arms to me with absolute authority. I took her. She grabbed 2 fistfuls of my shirt, put her head against my chest, and went to sleep. That was many years ago now. Ruth is grown. She's studying law in Chicago, which would have made Thomas Voss proud, and which makes Clara and me both somewhat terrified and extremely proud in equal measure. She writes long letters, full of her opinions, full of the sharpness and warmth that are entirely her own. She signs them, Ruth Voss Eagleheart, because she decided at 14 that she wanted to carry all of it. Everything that made her who she was. Thomas's name and mine both. Clara's hair has silver in it now. Her arm healed fully, which Limping Woman had promised and was right about. She tends a garden behind the cabin that is frankly embarrassing in its ambition. And she still reads everything she can get her hands on, and she still argues with me about things that matter and lets go of the things that don't. And she still, this is the thing I hold, like it's precious because it is. She still, when something has been too much, or too long, or too hard, finds me and puts her head against my chest. Not always. Not dramatically. Just when she needs to remember that there's somewhere to put it down, and I hold her. The way I did that first time in the valley, in the autumn light. The way I have done 1,000 times since. The way I will do until I can't. My grandfather said once that a man is not what happens to him. A man is what he does with what happens to him. I was tossed a woman off a cliff. I caught her baby, and they caught me back, which is the part nobody puts in the story, the part that's truest. I was the one who was falling, slow and quiet, for years, and didn't know it. Didn't know it until a gray-eyed woman landed on a ledge in the dark and held on, and a horse named Hart stopped on the rim and told me to look down. That's the story. That's all of it. That's enough. End.